The Journey of Abdurrahman bin Auf, From Zero to Guaranteed Heaven. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hi Sunnah friends, today we will discuss a very inspiring story about a friend of the Prophet who was extraordinary in his struggle and generosity. This is the story of Abdurrahman bin Auf. One day, when the city of Medina was in a safe and calm atmosphere, from a high place on the edge of the city, thick dust was seen billowing into the air. People thought there was a storm sweeping and blowing sand. However, then from behind the curtain of dust, they heard a little news about the arrival of a large, long caravan. Not long after, 700 vehicles loaded with their loads filled the streets and shook Medina. People called each other and invited each other to witness this excitement and share in the joy of the arrival of the wealth and sustenance brought by the caravan. al-Mu'mineen Aisha radiyallahu anha, when she heard the hustle and bustle of the caravan moving forward, asked, "What happened in the city of Medina?" Someone answered, "The caravan of Abdurrahman bin Auf has just arrived from Syria carrying his merchandise." "So is that caravan the one that caused all this shaking?" asked al-Mu'mineen. "Yes, O al-Mu'mineen. There were 700 vehicles." Al-Mu'mineen then recalled events that she had seen or statements that she had heard. Then she said, "I once heard the Messenger of Allah say, 'I saw Abdurrahman bin Auf enter paradise by crawling.'" Abdurrahman bin Auf will enter paradise by crawling? Why didn't he enter it by jumping or jogging with the first generation of the Messenger of Allah's companions? Hearing that, one of the companions conveyed the story of Aisha radiyallahu anha to Abdurrahman bin Auf. Then Abdurrahman remembered that he had heard this hadith from the Prophet more than once and with different wordings. Before the ropes of his business were untied, Abdurrahman stepped into Aisha's house, then said to her, "You have reminded me of a hadith that I have never forgotten. So bear witness that this caravan with all its cargo along with its vehicles and equipment, I dedicate in the path of Allah Azza wa Jalla." The entire cargo of the 700 vehicles was distributed to all the residents of Medina and its surroundings as a great good deed. This one incident alone is enough to carve a perfect picture of the life of the Prophet's companion, Abdurrahman bin Auf. He was a noble companion, Abdurrahman bin Auf. His name during the Jahiliyyah era was Abdu Amr, some said, Abdul Harith, some said Abdul Kaaba. Then the Prophet replaced it with Abdurrahman. His mother, Shifa bint Auf, converted to Islam and migrated. Abdurrahman converted to Islam at the beginning of the Prophet's preaching, namely before the Prophet entered al-Arqam's house. Abdurrahman moved twice to Habasha and participated in all the wars with the Prophet. He stood firm with Rasulullah during the Battle of Uhud. Even during the Battle of Tabuk, Rasulullah prayed behind him. Abdurrahman is one of the 10 companions who are guaranteed to enter heaven. One of the 6 companions of the Shura members appointed by Umar. One of the first generation of companions who took part in the Battle of Badr, the Quraysh from Bani Zuhra. One of 8 people who converted to Islam at the beginning of Rasulullah's preaching. At that time, the Prophet brought 2 friends together, one of whom was a Muhajirin resident of Mecca, and the other was from the Ansar resident of Medina. This brotherhood works so perfectly that it fascinates the heart. The Ansar people, who were natives of Medina, divided all their wealth in half with their brothers from among the Muhajirin, even giving up their wives. If he has 2 wives, he is willing to divorce one to marry his brother. At that time, the noble Messenger of Allah made brothers between Abdurrahman bin Auf and Sa'ad bin Rabi'. From Ibrahim bin Sa'ad, from his father, from his grandfather, he said, "When the Muhajirin people came to Medina, the Messenger of Allah related Abdurrahman to Sa'ad bin Rabi'. Sa'ad said to Abdurrahman, 'Indeed, I am the Ansar who has the most wealth. I give half of my property to you. I have 2 wives. See which one you like, just say her name to me and I will reject her. If she has completed her iddah, please marry her.' Abdurrahman said, 'May Allah bless you with your family and your wealth. Where is your market?' So the people showed him the Bani Qaynuqa market. Abdurrahman did not go home unless he brought excess dry milk and ghee. Then the next day Abdurrahman left again. Once he came while his clothes were showing a yellowish color, so the Prophet said, 'What is wrong with you?' He answered, 'I am married.' The Prophet asked, 'How much did you give him?' He answered, 1 golden nawat or gold weighs as much as a date seed.' During the Battle of Tabuk, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam prayed behind Abdurrahman. From al-Mughira bin Shu'bah that he participated with the Prophet in the Battle of Tabuk. Al-Mughira said, "Then the Messenger of Allah went to relieve himself on a sloping plain. I was bringing a small water container, bucket, before the Fajr prayer when the Messenger of Allah returned to me. I poured water from the bucket into the Prophet's 2 hands. So he washed his hands 3 times, then he washed his face. Then he tried to take his robe out of his arms. But the sleeves of his robe were narrow, so he put his hands in so that he put his arms out from under the robe. And he washed his arms up to his elbows, then he performed ablution on his pair of cuffs, wiped his 2 cuffs. Then he returned. I followed him. We saw that people had encouraged Abdurrahman bin Auf to come forward to lead the prayer. So Abdurrahman became their imam. The Prophet received 1 rak'ah. He prayed with the people in the last rak'at. When Abdurrahman greeted him, the Prophet stood up to complete his prayer. The Muslims were shocked, so they prayed the prayer over and over again. After the prayer, the Prophet turned to them and he said, "You have done good." Or he said, "You have done the right thing." The Prophet was proud of them because they had prayed on time. In a history from Amr bin Wahb at-Saqafi, he said, "We were with al-Mughira bin Shu'bah." So al-Mughira was asked, "Has anyone been an imam for the Prophet from this people besides Abu Bakr?" So he answered, "Yes." So al-Mughira said that the Prophet performed ablution. He rubbed his pair of hoofs and his turban. He prayed behind Abdurrahman bin Auf, 1 raka'at of the 2 raka'ats of the Fajr prayer. At that time I was with the Prophet. Then we completed 1 raka'ah where we were left behind. Among the manaqib of Abdurrahman is that the Prophet guaranteed him entry into heaven, and that he was among those who took part in the Battle of Badr, where Allah said to them, "Do as you please, because I have forgiven you." Abdurrahman bin Auf is among those mentioned in this verse. Indeed, Allah was pleased with the believers when they swore allegiance to you, Muhammad, under the tree. QS Al-Fath 18. From Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, he said, there was a dispute between Khalid bin al-Walid and Abdurrahman bin Auf. Then Khalid insulted Abdurrahman, so the Prophet said, "Do not insult any of my companions. If one of them you give in charity the gold equivalent to Uhud, it will not equal 1 mud of them or even half of it." Hadith narrated by Bukhari, 2541. The life of Abdurrahman bin Auf in Medina, both during the time of the Prophet and after his death, always carry out perfectly to fulfill the rights of this deen and do good deeds in the world. His business was successful and profitable. He uses his wealth to strengthen family relationships and strengthen ties of brotherhood, as well as providing the equipment needed by the Islamic army. One day he heard the Messenger of Allah say, "O Ibn Auf, you are among the rich, and you will enter heaven by crawling. Therefore lend your wealth to Allah, so that He will make your steps easier." Since he heard the advice of the Messenger of Allah and provided Allah with a good loan, Allah actually multiplied his wealth until it was abundant. From Talha bin Abdullah bin Auf, he said, the people of Medina depended on Abdurrahman bin Auf. He gave 1/3 of them loans from his money. He paid off the debts of another 1/3 of the population, and he maintained ties with another 1/3 of the population. From Urwa that Abdurrahman bin Auf made a will of 50,000 dinars to be spent in the way of Allah. There was even one person who received a share of the willed wealth of 1,000 dinars. From Az-Zuri that Abdurrahman bin Auf made a will for the people who participated in the Battle of Badr. There were 100 of them at that time. Then Abdurrahman gave one of them 400 dinars. Among them was Uthman, and he accepted him, even though he was a rich man. He said, "Abdurrahman bin Auf's treasure is halal and clean, and eating this treasure brings safety and blessings." From Abu Huraira he said, the Messenger of Allah said, "The best of you are the kindest to my family after I die." Then Abdurrahman bin Auf sold his garden for 400,000. Then he distributed it to the Prophet's wives. From Salama he said, "I heard the Messenger of Allah say to his wives, 'Indeed, the person who loves you after my death is a true and good person. O Allah, give Abdurrahman bin Auf a drink from the Salsabil River in heaven.'" Even during the time of the Prophet Abdurrahman, he spent half of his wealth. After that he gave alms with 40,000 dinars. Then he prepared 500 horses and 500 camels. Most of his wealth comes from business. Someone said, Abdurrahman freed 31 of his servants in one day. From Anas, he said, I saw that each of Abdurrahman's wives received 100,000 from his inheritance. Tawahtu Allah. Ad-Daraqutni narrated from Ibn Umar that he said, the Prophet called Abdurrahman bin Auf. He said to him, get ready, I am sending you in an army. Then Ibn Umar mentioned the hadith in it. Then Abdurrahman set out until he caught up with his companions. He walked until he arrived at Dumatul Jandal. When Abdurrahman entered the area, he invited its people to Islam for 3 days. On the third day, al-Ashbag bin Amr al-Kalbi converted to Islam. Previously, he was a Christian, and he was their leader. Then Abdurrahman wrote news to the Prophet and sent it through a man from Juhayna named Rafi bin Makits. So the Prophet wrote a letter to Abdurrahman so that he would marry the daughter of al-Ashbag. So Abdurrahman married her. She was Tamadur bint al-Ashbag. From her was born Abu Salama bin Abdurrahman. Tawadhu Abdurrahman. From Sa'ad bin al-Hasan at-Tamimi, he said, it is difficult to differentiate between Abdurrahman and his servants, namely, because his tawadhu and his clothes were the same as them. From Sa'ad bin Ibrahim, from his father, that food was served to Abdurrahman bin Auf. At that time he was fasting, so he said, Mushab bin Umair has fallen, and he is better than me. He was shrouded in a sheet. When the cloth was covered over his head, his legs were exposed. If the cloth was covered over his legs, his head would be exposed. Ibrahim said, I thought Abdurrahman bin Auf also said, Hamza had fallen, and he was better than me, and then the world opened up for us as we felt. Or, he says, we have been given a world like this. We fear this is our goodness being hastened upon us. Then Abdurrahman cried, so he left the food. Zuhud Abdurrahman against power. From Abdurrahman bin Azhar that Uthman complained of a nosebleed, so he called Humran. Uthman said to him, write a letter to Abdurrahman as my successor after me. So Humran wrote a letter and then went to meet Abdurrahman. Humran said to Abdurrahman, be happy. Abdurrahman asked, what is that? Humran answered, indeed, Uthman has appointed you as his successor. Then Abdurrahman stood between the grave of the Prophet and the pulpit, Rauda. He said, O Allah, if it is because Uthman appointed me to handle this matter, kill me before that. After that he did not last 6 months, unless Allah had taken his life. Imam Az-Zahabi said, Abdurrahman's best deed was that he withdrew from the caliphate case during deliberations. Abdurrahman chooses for the Ummah who is agreed upon by the Ahlul Halli wal Aqdi. Here Abdurrahman did his best to unite the people to Uthman. If Abdurrahman had ambitions in this matter, he would have chosen for himself, or he will give it to his cousin and the person closest to him, namely Sa'ad bin Abi Waqqash. Time to say goodbye. Abdurrahman departed very peacefully after a long life filled with sacrifice, generosity, giving, and jihad in the way of Allah with body and soul. From Sa'ad bin Ibrahim, from his father, he said, I saw Sa'ad bin Abi Waqqash stood in front of the body of Abdurrahman bin Auf on the sides of the 2 feet of the bier. He said, a mountain has gone. From Ibrahim bin Sa'ad, from his father, from his grandfather, that he said, I heard Ali bin Abi Talib say to when Abdurrahman died, Go, O Ibn Auf, you have attained its clarity and preceded its turbidity. May Allah be pleased with Abdurrahman, Uthman, and all the companions.